Today we're going to go through the 12 cranial nerves and the basic region of the brainstem that they are associated with. The first two, actually, so cranial nerve 1 and cranial nerve 2, are actually not directly associated with the brainstem. So cranial nerve 1 is the olfactory nerve, and it goes directly to the brain and it directly goes to that olfactory tract, right? It's that olfactory cortex for smelling. Then the cranial nerve 2, right, or the optic nerve, it has its own optic tract, so it has its own tract, and that ultimately ends at the occipital lobe. There's a lot of steps in the middle, but that can be for a different video. So these are still cranial nerves because they're nerves that are in your cranium, but they don't go to the brainstem like the other 9 do. So let's start at cranial nerve 3. So cranial nerve 3, or the olfactory, or the, not olfactory, my bad, the oculomotor nerve, right? So if you see oculo, think eyes. Motor means movement. And we have the eye movement nerve, and so it controls many muscles in eyes. The eyes, okay? And so if I kind of scroll down a little bit, if I draw my brainstem, right, I've got my midbrain region, I've got my pons, and I've got my medulla oblongata. So the oculomotor nerve, right, a lot of times people think that it goes to the pons because, well, students will think that because pons have a lot to do with movement. But remember, the midbrain has visual reflex association. And so where we actually are going to see the cranial nerve 3 is going to be going into the midbrain. So cranial nerve 3 is going to go into the midbrain because, again, it's going to be reacting to the movements of the eye. One of the big ones that's important to note is that it is going to be involved in pupil constriction. So if I'm thinking about visual, like a light reflex, right? Bright light and my eyes shrink, cranial nerve 3 plays a large role in that. And that's all kind of tied to the midbrain. I'm just going to put the labels here. Okay. Now let's move on to cranial nerve 4. Otherwise known as the trochlear nerve. And it only moves one muscle of the eye, but it moves the muscle of the eye. It moves our superior oblique eye muscle. Okay. And again, still going to be involved with the same sort of movement as cranial nerve 3 was, so it also is going to go to the midbrain. Now we have cranial nerve 5, or the trigeminal nerve. And the trigeminal nerve does many things. It's a mixed nerve, and so it's mixed between facial sensations and chewing. So it's one of the ones that gets numbed when you go to the dentist. And it's going to go depending on what what aspect of the trigeminal nerves we're talking about. It can go really to any of these regions, right, to communicate what's going on. So it depends on a number of things, and we can talk about it in another video about the special senses, the sensory aspects of what's happening in each of the nerves. But for right now, I just want you to think of which parts of the brainstem based on the types of activity that we see. All right. Moving on to cranial nerve 6. So cranial nerve 6 is going to be the abducens nerve. Abducens nerve. And again, it's going to be an eye muscle nerve. What's unique about it, though, is it actually goes to the pons instead of the midbrain. And that's just based on the muscle that it controls and its function. Now we're moving on to cranial nerve 7. 7. Cranial nerve 7 is the facial nerve. This is another mixed nerve where we're going to be controlling a lot of different things, but when we're thinking about it, it's going to be controlling the motor of my facial expressions, and other such things. And then we're going to see a lot of kind of with the mouth. Okay, so things like taste, saliva, and what have you. So it's also, interestingly, in the pons. Okay, so we have the facial nerve, even more so than the trigeminal nerve, is one of the ones that we actually experience a lot more numbing with at the dentist. Moving on to cranial nerve 8. Cranial nerve 8 is referred to as the vestibulocochlear nerve. Cochlear nerve. And it's going to have kind of a combination of two functions of hearing and balance, right? If you've ever heard of your inner ear, we have balance, proprioception coming from our inner ear. The vestibulocochlear nerve picks up on that. And then it also is going to be, because it's already in your ear, it's going to be associated with hearing. We're going to see cranial nerve 8, because of its kind of combination of hearing and moving and balance, it's going to be in both the pons and the medulla. Okay. Moving on to cranial nerve 9. Cranial nerve 9 is the glossopharyngeal nerve. And the glossopharyngeal nerve is, along with cranial nerve 7, can do things with tasting. But the big thing that it's going to do is swallowing. Huge on swallowing. Okay. So, and we're going to find cranial nerve 9. Oops, that's 11. Cranial nerve 9, we're going to find it in the medulla. Okay. Now on to cranial nerve 10, or the vagus nerve. This is also kind of a mixed nerve, and it's going to be involved in so many processes down below in thinking of viscera. Lots of control in the viscera, things like your stomach, things like your lungs, things like, there's so many things that the vagus nerve controls within your torso. And so because of just how much stuff it does, it's huge. So it's the big nerve. And because a lot of these, think about the different parts of the brainstem and what's keeping you alive, the vagus nerve is going to be definitely going to the medulla, which is going to be that primary, that keeping you alive part of your brainstem. The last two of our cranial nerves, we have cranial nerve 11, which is our accessory nerve. And it's going to be pretty much movement. So we're going to recruit it for some additional movements around the neck and the traps up here. So it's going to be associated with the medulla. And then cranial nerve 12, the hypoglossal nerve, is tongue movement. And so if there's thought of damage to your cranial nerves, we can actually tell you to stick your tongue out, and if it's going in the wrong direction, we know something's wrong with our hypoglossal nerve. And it also goes to the medulla. Anyway, I hope this helps with knowing what they are, what their names are, and what they generally do.